online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 10, I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops were flown out of Kabul. Thousands are evacuated from their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. And a triumph in Tokyo. Hannah Cockcroft smashes her own world record at the Paralympics. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops were flown out of Kabul airport. The final RAF plane left at around 9:25 last night following efforts to evacuate those who were at risk from the Taliban. The Prime Minister said it's a moment to reflect on the military's achievements as he paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
They didn't flinch. They kept calm. They got on with the job. It's thanks to their colossal exertions that this country has now processed, checked, vetted and airlifted more than 15,000 people to safety in less than 2 weeks.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. The State Department has urged all American citizens to stay away from the area where around 170 people were killed in a bombing on Thursday. Thousands of people have now been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region, and the American president has warned those living there to prepare for the worst.
Ida is turning into a very, very dangerous storm. I need not tell you. Just got another briefing from the Hurricane Center, and as you know, it's now heading straight for right toward Louisiana. We have to do everything we can to prepare the people in the region and make sure we're ready to respond.
Back here in the UK, a woman's in a critical condition in hospital after she and 2 others were injured in an incident involving a festival ride in Cumbria. Emergency crews were called to Fudstock in Barrow-in-Ferns at around 8:30 yesterday evening. The incident has been referred to the Health and Safety Executive. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. This brings Paralympics GB medal tally to 20 golds, 17 silver and 17 bronzes so far on day 5 of the competition. And your weather, dry and sunny spells for most places today with some cloud in the northeast, highs of 22 degrees. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV, more in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Radio. It is Sunday the 29th of August, and yes, I've been allowed back for my 3rd show. And unbelievably, as I look outside the window, do you know, the weather simply hasn't changed in the last 3 weeks. The skies are leaden grey, just like the news. It has been a week of gloom and doom throughout the news, and there really hasn't been much sunshine throughout all of this August. But we have got an action-packed show this bank holiday weekend, and I want your input, your views, your thoughts. We've got amazing guests talking about a whole range of interesting subjects. My Sunday Spotlight this week, I'm exposing what I think is corporate wrongdoing, my big Sunday Spotlight expose. I've got a big Sunday debate with some amazing guests as well. We're going to be saying, should we ban online anonymity? Would that make social media a happier place? I'm sure you'll have plenty of views on that. We're going to be talking GPs, why we can't see them face to face. We'll be talking the nemesis of us Brexiteers, Michel Barnier. And of course, we'll be talking about the lorry driver shortage. Some are blaming Brexit, but I'll give you the truth. All of this and much much more. But I want your views, so give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us on talk at 87222, and I promise I'll read out the texts and the tweets if you tweet us at Talk Radio. And of course, you can watch us on Talk Radio's TV app, or on YouTube, or on Apple TV, Samsung, Roku and Rakuten. And if any of you actually use some of those last ones, let us know. I don't really know what they are. I want you to help me. All of this, you are listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB and on your smart speaker. This is Talk Radio.
Yes, the lineup of guests we have got to discuss the big issues on my show today. I've got an existing MP, Bob Seeley, MP for the Isle of Wight. I've got two former MEPs talking about vital issues in the third hour. I've got Baroness Claire Fox. She is a passionate advocate of free speech, the public square, debating, discussion. She's going to be joining the big online debate. We've got former soldiers, we've got doctors. There is so much to talk about. In the first hour, of course, we've got to be talking about Afghanistan, the dramas there. Since I started this show just 2 weeks ago, I mean, so much has happened. The humiliation for the West, the embarrassment, the chaos, and then all leading this week to the horror and the tragedy. And the papers are full of stories, of course. The blame game is starting, and that's going to be the next big thing. And we're going to have to look to the future. What does this mean for our relationship in that region? Do we just let China and Russia get on with it, or actually have we got to be smart? Pictures of troops coming home on the front pages. You know, we are so grateful and thank you for their service, their efforts. You know, the fear that they must have gone through, the dangers that they've been so dramatically, horrifically exposed with the tragic loss of those US Marines. So we'll be talking Afghanistan in the first hour. The big Sunday spotlight. So here, I hope you finished your cornflakes or your scrambled eggs. If not, finish your mouthful, because we're going to be talking, yes, sewage. I'm going to be talking about the company, the water company in the south of England, that has been spilling huge amounts of raw, untreated sewage into the sea adjacent to our sunny, silken, sandy beaches that our children have been swimming in, all the while whilst their owners have been taking vast profits out the side door. I don't think that's acceptable, and we'll be talking to Bob Seeley about that. I want you to imagine an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then imagine that it's full of not water, but sewage. Then imagine 7,000 of those swimming pools. That is the sort of quantity of sewage that this company dumped into our seas around the south coast in recent years. They've had a huge fine from the Environment Agency. It's an extraordinary story, and there's much more to come on that. In the second hour, the big Sunday debate. Should we ban online anonymity? I'm sure you'll have plenty of views, plenty of thoughts on this. The world was a nicer place, in a sense, when we had debates and discussions face to face before social media came along. And there wasn't the abuse, the vitriol, the ranting. Well, maybe there was the ranting, but there wasn't the name calling and the slander, the libel. And all of that, of course, has come in with social media. And you might say, well, you've just got to man up, broad shoulders, put up with it, or don't go on social media. Perfectly legitimate point of view. But would we be better off? Would we encourage more people into debate to discuss things, more people put their head above the parapet, if it was a nicer place, if it was a bit more courteous, a bit more civilised, a bit more respectful? To do that, you'd have to get rid of anonymity. So I want your views. I'm sure you'll have plenty of thoughts, and we've got two great guests to discuss this, because there's some pluses, there's some minuses about that topic. And I did ask, actually, the chief executive of Twitter UK to join the debate, but surprise, surprise, they didn't want to accept it. So that, I hope you'll join me and give me your thoughts on that. In the second hour, we'll also be talking GPs. Tell us whether you can see your GP in your local surgery face to face and get an appointment, nice and quickly within a couple of days? Or have you, like many people I've heard of, been told, well, you might get a phone call in about 2.5 weeks. It might be in the morning, it might be in the afternoon. Stand by your phone, don't do anything else. These are really big issues. I think there's a real issue, a real crisis going on about access, face-to-face appointments. But tell me if you think I'm wrong, if you've had good experiences, because we need to celebrate the good as well as challenge the bad. Also, in the third hour, then we're going to be moving on to what does the future hold for our relationship, for the West relationship in the region of Afghanistan and the neighbouring countries, Pakistan, Iran, looking forwards. We can't, in a sense, I don't think it's right that we should just sit in isolation and let China and other states essentially take over that region and have a free run at it. So we'll be talking to Ben Habib, who's got strong links, strong family ties with Pakistan. He's written an interesting article in the Sunday Express. Be interesting to hear his thoughts, his views. And of course, we must talk Michel Barnier. Yes, the nemesis of us Brexiteers, a brilliant negotiator, completely outfoxed Theresa May's woeful negotiating team. He is now standing to be elected. I know that's quite rare for him, quite a change. He wants to be elected as Monsieur le Président de la France. Extraordinary. And you might think that he might be standing on a policy of more integration, more lovely rules and regulations from Brussels. Mais non, pas du tout. Not at all. No. Unbelievably, he wants to stand, and his main policy is he wants to ban immigration for about 5 years. Can you believe it? Seriously, I have to repeat it. He wants to ban immigration for up to 5 years. He wants to relook at the whole Schengen agreement. I mean, this is the bloke who said all of this was impossible. These things, the great four freedoms of the EU was all indivisible. And now he wants to change it. Is he a hypocrite? Is he just seeking power? We'll be talking to Rupert Lowe about that. So much going on. And of course, we can't not discuss the issue of lorry driver shortages. Some people are saying it's due to Brexit, but actually I think there's a lot more to this. The reality is that, and I always said through the Brexit debate, that actually it's some of the lowest paid, the least well off who will benefit the most. And the good news is, yes, guess what? Big businesses, big firms, if you want lorry drivers, you're going to have to pay up. You're going to have to increase their wages because they suffered much lower wages, a declining real wage over the last decade. The leverage now, the negotiating leverage, is back in the hands of the lorry drivers. That's good news. And I've been hearing some stories from people about, some of the really difficult working conditions that lorry drivers work in. So there's so much to talk about. Great guests. Please stay with us. And I need your views, your inputs, and your thought. Give us a call, 0344. And I think we've already got Mick in Leicester, who's straight on the phones talking about supermarkets. Mick, are you there? Good morning to you. You're bright and early.
Yeah, hello, Richard. Yeah, I'm out walking the dog, mate.
Out walking the dog, lovely.
Yeah.
What can you tell me, Mick?
He's happy. Yeah, I've seen some stuff on Twitter around about empty supermarket shelves and the Brexit's to blame and all this stuff. And a simple search on Google, for example, go and search Rotterdam. Rotterdam's got a massive problem because the barges can't get into Rotterdam to unload because of a shortage of a whole load of stuff. Go and search Shanghai. They closed for 10 days because of a COVID outbreak, the third largest port in the world. They only opened again last Thursday. Go to Los Angeles. There are 33 ships last Thursday sitting outside Los Angeles, couldn't get in to unload because of the global supply prices.
You're quite...
These FBE clones.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mick. There are shortages, there are challenges, there are pressures all over the world at the moment as we come out of the pandemic. No question at all. Thank you for that, Mick. And there are so many more reasons than just the sort of the lazy, easy, it's Brexit fault. Well, keep those calls coming in. Keep the tweets coming in. We've got a tweet here on the issue of anonymity from Tad, who says, I always use my own name. I readily engage with people who want a reasonable, civilised debate. Tad also says they haven't lost one yet. We'll see. Anyway, keep the calls, keep the tweets coming in 0344 499 1000. The time is 10:14. You are listening to Tice Talk at the home of common sense. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Sunday morning on Talk Radio. And of course, the first subject we have to cover is Afghanistan. It's all over the newspapers, all sorts of stories, some sort of good stories of people managing to escape, other tragic stories of people being left behind. I'm delighted that we're joined online, on the phone and on Zoom now by Rob Clark, the Defence Policy Associate at the Henry Jackson Society, to give us some more thoughts on this. Good morning, Rob. And actually, Rob, you can help me with, first of all, a tweet that's just come in. I know you served for many years, I believe, in Afghanistan. And the tweet that's just come in is, why did we need so many interpreters in Afghanistan? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, just before we move on to other issues.
Sure. Morning, Richard. Thanks for having me. In terms of the interpreters, the number that we had, it's around 4,000 to 4,500 that we had over the 20-year campaign. When we consider a lot of these men, they rotated through their own cycles. They rotated through, obviously, with leave and rest and going back to their families and what else. So it's actually, in the scheme of things, it's actually quite a small amount of interpreters that we had. For example, when I was there in 2013, 2014, we had one interpreter with us for the entire time.
Right.
So it's not like this is a large amount of people in the scheme of things. Some people may think, 4,000 or 5,000 Afghans coming over, is a large amount. But like I say, in the scheme of the military campaign that we had, this is a campaign that we had for 20 years that saw over 150,000 British troops deployed. So to have 4,000 to 5,000 interpreters isn't too big in the scheme of things.
That's the point. I mean, 20 years, 2 decades, a huge amount of people involved. And if we, obviously, the paper's full of stories, Rob. In a sense, we've got to look forwards there. We know where we are, which is basically, we have pulled out. We think the last flights have definitely taken off, potentially landed back here in the UK, and so in a sense, it's over. We are where we are, but we have to now start to look forward. And already, the Prime Minister is talking about using our leverage, and he's going to judge the Taliban by what they do. In a sense, what leverage actually, Rob, do we have anymore, or essentially are we completely impotent?
Sure. So actually, the UK maintain quite a lot of leverage still, not just with Afghanistan, but with regional partners as well. So, for example, that leverage can take several forms. It can take the form of diplomatic leverage. One of the things I've been advocating for is the UK should be immediately, using its influence in the United Nations with the Human Rights Council, for example, to set up an independent verification system for the Taliban's human rights record. One of the things that Boris Johnson and other world leaders have stated, we should give the Taliban some form of space and some form of time to see if they make good on their promises. I think this is absolutely ridiculous based on their track record and their current record over the last few weeks. We've already seen war crimes, mass killings, rape, conducted by the Taliban, not just in Kabul, but across Afghanistan. So we don't even need to see that far back. We're talking within the last few weeks. So their track record is embellished enough. However, the leverage that we can have, the diplomatic leverage at the UN for organising, like I say, the Human Rights Council for an independent verification on their human rights abuses. We currently hold around £155 million in overseas development assistance to Afghanistan. Now, I know Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, had stated back in December, actually last year, that this was going to be increased to around 250, top end up to around £300 million a year. Now, again, that should be immediately withheld. I know other countries are doing the same. And again, that should be based on whether the Taliban make good on their promises, for example, with human rights, women's rights, the rights of ethnic minorities, and also their ability to promote a free and open media that we've seen in Afghanistan over the last 10 or 15 years.
And this is the thing, because obviously there's that money that you've just referred to. We've read stories that there are actually that in American banks that Afghanistan government had billions of pounds of assets that apparently have now been frozen. And I guess the question is, Rob, does money talk? Does that matter? Or given that the Taliban now have access to tens of billions of dollars of military equipment, will they actually just be able to sell off chunks of that military equipment and gain access to money that way? What are your thoughts on that? How valuable is that equipment that has been essentially just left to them?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's a very good point indeed. We're talking about several £1 billion worth of military equipment. In terms of their ability to sell it off, a lot of that equipment is actually specially programmed for, the end user to already be trained in it. So, for example, the helicopters that the Taliban have taken over, they can't fly them. They have no trained pilots, they have no trained crew, and there's no sustainment or logistical ability for them to actually implement those military systems, insofar as just having them sat idle on the runway, for instance. And that'll go again whether they sell them off to a third party. But it's an incredibly worrying situation. In terms of money talks, we've already seen the Taliban say that they're open to cancelling the opium harvest and try to get some form of more legitimate, respectable income from an agricultural source. So they're already seeking Western help through that. They've already appealed to Britain and America through obviously third-party channels. The fact that they are financially very, very difficult at the minute. The lightning advances that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 months in Afghanistan by the Taliban has not come for free. Now, all the fighters need paying. That's one of the reasons why the Afghan National Army were so quick to, not have much of a fight, is because they weren't being paid by the government because the government's so corrupt.
So but presumably, Rob, if it's not the Black Hawk helicopters, if they can't get people to maintain and service and fly those, then there's obviously value in lots of the other equipment that has been left by essentially by the NATO allies through the Afghan army that would be valuable.
Oh, sure. And this goes back to one of the absolutely chaotic reasons why the withdrawals happened over so swift of a process over the last few weeks, last few months. And we're now seeing these incredibly dangerous examples of the consequences of this. For President Biden to have announced the decision to withdraw in only a matter of weeks, or relatively speaking, the withdrawal process was only a matter of weeks. And now we've seen, the desertion of Bagram Air Base. We've seen diplomatic embassies and outposts with valuable documents left behind. It's just absolutely shambolic. And unfortunately, this is one of the consequences of such a rushed withdrawal. And unfortunately, that lies squarely at President Biden. Now it's up to President Biden and his team to decide and implement, strategies to actually mitigate the significant and serious damage that this would have done. And your point here about highlighting, the loss of military hardware is just a prime example of that.
And where would much of that hardware be? Would much of it be at Bagram Air Base, which extraordinarily was just vacated literally overnight? Is that where much of it would be, the helicopters and things?
Well, I mean, it's scattered around various old American bases. So, for example, in the traditional way of a phased withdrawal that would take a process of months or even years. A good example is when the British left Helmand in 2014, 2015. There was a gradual process of about 2 years of handing over the British platoon bases and the forward operating bases to the Afghan National Army, one at a time in an organised manner. And that way kit and infrastructure could be taken back again in an organised and manageable way. So America still had around 50 or 55 bases still in Afghanistan up until the withdrawal announcement. So it's almost inconceivable that they could have just handed all these over and taken their kit back in a manageable way in only 2 or 3 months.
It is unbelievable, but I guess we are where we are, and tough though it is to ask this question, to sort of think the unthinkable, Rob. At what point and how do we establish some form of relationship, in inverted commas, links with the Taliban? Because essentially, they are the regime in charge, and at some point, the West is, we are going to have to engage with them. How soon does that happen, and how difficult will that be?
Well, I think in terms of how soon we engage with the Taliban in any meaningful diplomatic way depends entirely upon the Taliban's behaviour. If we consider, and just put out there, the caveat on this is it is nowhere near that time yet. We should not be recognising the Taliban as a legitimate form of government. They haven't even formed a government yet. They've just basically taken over a vacant premise. What's really crucial to remember in this conversation, however, is under the Afghan constitution, which British and American lives basically died to protect. Under the Afghan constitution, Vice President Amrullah Saleh, who's up in the Panjshir Valley, he is the legitimate head of state. And there's been almost zero conversation, especially amongst the serious political offices, of how they can support who is still the actual de facto legal head of state for Afghanistan. I think it's absolutely breathtaking. So first and foremost, rather than being talking about when we should be engaging with the Taliban, it's why aren't we engaging with the political legitimate head of the Afghan government, who up until 4 weeks ago was a vice president. So I think that's quite shocking. In terms of the Taliban, though, going forwards, like I said regarding the human rights record, until they seriously display and demonstrate, and it's actually verified independently, albeit through the United Nations, that they actually mean good on their word. Yeah. And even then, it can be taken very, very loosely as to the British engagement. Like I said, we really should be looking at ways in the short term, immediately, how we can actually be supporting both the Afghan national resistance to the Taliban, who, let's not face it, are still listed, a listed terrorist organisation. This whole narrative is almost theatrical in the extreme. Why on earth we should be pandering and appeasing to the Taliban regime?
Clearly, we shouldn't be in any way pandering or appeasing to them. It is, of course, the reality. They are in charge, and this this discussion will be ongoing for months and years to come. Rob, thank you so much for your insight, for your thoughts on this Sunday morning. It is now approaching 10:30. We've been talking Afghanistan, but coming up straight after the news, we're going to be going into my big Sunday spotlight, the expose of what's been going on our beaches in southern England. You're listening or watching Tice Talk, and this is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops were flown out of Kabul. And a triumph in Tokyo, Hannah Cockcroft smashes her own world record at the Paralympics. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops were flown out of Kabul airport. The final RAF plane left at around 9:25 last night, following efforts to evacuate those who were at risk from the Taliban. The Prime Minister said it's a moment to reflect on the military's achievements as he paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
They didn't flinch. They kept calm. They got on with the job. It's thanks to their colossal exertions that this country has now processed, checked, vetted and airlifted more than 15,000 people to safety in less than 2 weeks.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. This brings Paralympics GB medal tally to 20 gold, 17 silver and 17 bronzes so far on day 5 of the competition. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on this Sunday morning. The time is 10:33 and we're going to move away from Afghanistan to focus on some of the big issues, the important issues affecting our daily lives. And I want your calls, your input. 0344 499 1000. Now, some of you might be customers. Some of you listening or watching, you might be customers of Southern Water that provide the water and sewage treatment in the south of England. And they've got over 1 million customers. And now, interestingly, they're owned mainly by overseas shareholders, overseas investors, including a Chinese billionaire with relatively pretty close links to the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist regime. Now, Southern Water has been responsible not for just a few, but for literally thousands and thousands of breaches of regulations over the last decade, including dumping, as I said earlier, dumping some 7,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of sewage into the sea by our lovely southern sandy beaches. Now, the Environment Agency took them to court, and there was a ruling just last month where the judge fined Southern Water £90 million. I mean, that is a massive fine. And the judge and the Environment Agency, they concluded, and this is unbelievable, that the directors of Southern Water carried out these offences deliberately. And the Environment Agency said these offences were the worst ever seen. Now, you'll get all the usual corporate spin and the corporate flannel and waffle that they're very sorry, they're investing huge sums to sort this out. And so these overseas investors, they like us to think that they're not taking money out of the front door from their huge profits. And let's just talk about their profits. They're making profits of some 25% every single year. Operating profits, 25%. That compares to your supermarket down the road, who's probably taking out operating profits in low single figures. That just puts it in context. But Southern Water, they say they're not paying out dividends out the front door to their shareholders. They're investing it in the business. Well, I discovered, because I had a bit of time on my hands, and I kept reading the accounts, and I kept reading, and I kept reading, and eventually I got to page 109, where I discovered that actually Southern Water's shareholders are taking out every year about £150 million out of what I call the side door, because they're taking it out by way of interest at a very high interest rate on loans they've made to the company when they bought it. 12% interest. 12% interest on their loans. So this is a very clever tactic. It's quite a common thing in the corporate world. So they're saying on the one hand they're not taking out dividends, but on the other hand they're taking 150 million every year out the side door, while sewage over many, many years has been pouring into the sea adjacent to our beaches. I don't think that's acceptable, and I think we need to be continuing to ask serious questions. I'm delighted to be joined by the MP for the Isle of Wight, which is in the Southern Water region, Bob Seeley. Bob, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. Now, you're obviously aware of these transgressions. Are you aware, is this continuing, or do you think that they're getting on top of this? And what's the latest news that you've got, Bob?
Richard, good morning. Good morning to your listeners and viewers. Well, look, I mean, as you know, you are, if I understand correctly, and do sometimes visit Seaview on the Isle of Wight. And Seaview is one of those places that has an overspill pipe. So when there's raw sewage that comes out, it goes straight into that pipe down into the bay in Seaview. Now, don't get me wrong, the Isle of Wight's waters around the Isle of Wight still tend to be very, very clean, certainly compared to many other parts of the UK. But frankly, any spill is too many spills. And in 2020, we had 2,442 spills off the island. I'm just looking at my facts. Apologies if I'm turning away from the screen. 126 days in 2020, and that's the number of spills. Southern Water got fined. The £70 million fine was for spills that occurred in Kent and in that bit of the English Channel. But all along Southern Water coasts, there is a problem of raw data overspill. Now, we got Southern Water down to the Isle of Wight, and their local people are very good, and I'm not going to criticise Keith and Katie because they're a good team down here, and they do their best. The problem very often with the management of these corporations, it's very high with people who are willing to basically spend more time dealing with corporate affairs than customers, frankly, but also then the structured ownership. And we had exactly the same problem. You're talking about the high interest and forcing large loans on sort of UK infrastructure to make the profits or to load them up with debt and to take the money out and use that money elsewhere. That's exactly the same structure that we had for the Isle of Wight ferry, White Link ferry, when various corporate owners have owned it. And I'm conservative, so I support capitalism, but there is a capitalism that works for people, and there is a capitalism that doesn't.
Exactly. I mean, look, we believe, like you, I'm involved in the world of business. I believe in free markets, but it has to be within a smart regulatory regime, and there has to be the concept of responsible corporate behaviour, and what I believe is moral hazard. And this is going on. We're touching on Southern Water, but I actually have real concerns. And I'll be fascinated what our listeners and viewers think, and please do call us on this through the show. Is it right that overseas owners are taking out huge profits, and the consequence is that all of us around the UK are suffering higher bills to prop up those profits, when actually these are critical parts of our national infrastructure? And the Chinese billionaire who owns shares in Southern Water, is also, I believe, Bob, the largest single owner of all UK utilities, whether that's electricity firms, whether it's gas firms, whether it's water firms. I think that he, through his holdings, is the largest single owner, and that actually gives me real cause for concern that we're overexposed here.
Yes, and it's not just this one person, but clearly the fact that he's overseas, and probably, I don't even know if he knows much about the companies he's investing in, but it's actually it is structuring these companies so that they are taking out large loans and that they're paying, frankly, exorbitant rates of interest. This is an unfortunate model that we have, that some private equity firms have used when it comes to UK infrastructure, and it's a way of squeezing money out. So these are, I mean, water companies are very heavily regulated. They're sort of quasi, sort of private monopolies in many ways, or they're corporate monopolies, and they've got some very, very strict criteria. But there doesn't seem to be much criteria around the debt, and it's here that you can make money, and really quite large amounts of money. And again, we saw this. I mean, I think we saw this because the ownership and the practices are so complex, it's difficult to get to the bottom of this. I'm trying to get to the bottom of some of these corporate, frankly, sharks who've owned the ferry firm.
I mean,
because they know that as well.
Absolutely, I understand that. And yes, it's complicated, but actually, Bob, it didn't take me very long. Okay, 109 pages, it's pretty dull stuff. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist to find out, this information. It's all there. And it's the same across all of our critical infrastructure, our utilities, as I say, the electricity, the gas. What starts to concern me is, okay, so if this is owned by these utility companies are owned by a Chinese billionaire with links to the Chinese Communist Party. Here's the question. We all know that Chinese firms, essentially, they have to do the bidding of the Chinese communist regime. If that communist regime says jump, the response from the firm is not why, it's how high would you like me to jump? And my concern is if relations deteriorate between us and China, and we saw what China did with the sort of bullying tactics with Australia last year. If China literally, if the Chinese communist regime said, well, you need to teach the Brits a thing or two, literally, they could potentially turn the lights out in southern England. They could turn the gas off in parts of northern England. They could turn the taps off in parts of Wales. And what I want to know is, has the government got a plan B, C and D in that event? Because I think we need to know that if we're going to have all of our critical infrastructure owned by overseas investors.
I think look, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Richard. And I think this is actually an incredibly important campaign. It'd be great to get, as well as yourself, to see if we can get other people engaged. And I will certainly be, let's have a chat over the next couple of weeks. I'll certainly be looking to put down some questions, because I want to highlight, the amount of debt that these companies have and what they're paying on their loans. So there's clearly a state or quasi-state risk, because you've got foreign owners who are semi-hostile to the United Kingdom, who may or may not try to use this for crude political muscle. It's not so much a threat to turn off and on, or that's ultimately there. It's actually just the amount of ownership from Chinese equities that you're going to get in this country that simply increases the political influence that that country has. And that is not necessarily a healthy thing, because we are already over-dependent on China in our supply chains, including supply chains for critical national infrastructure. So there's a state problem there. But there's also a sort of a corporate structure problem as well, which feeds into that, which is actually there is so little control over the amount of loans and how these private interests take over large infrastructure entities, large or small, be it Southern Water, be it Whiteling, and run them without a primary sense of the public good, but actually just structure these companies to provide a regular and much higher stream of profit and potentially interest on loans than they would get using more sort of ethically acceptable.
I think there's a real lack of control and supervision, because one of the other companies that this Chinese billionaire owns, UK Power Networks, was sold to the French company EDF back in, I think, 2011, give or take. And then, of course, EDF then sold it on to the Chinese. And I think we need some control over the ownership of our critical infrastructure. And Bob, yeah, I think we do need to ask serious questions. We do need much more focus. I just think we are overexposed, over vulnerable from a safety and security point of view, as well as the risk that tens of millions of British citizens, families across the UK, are paying higher bills in order to pay these huge shareholder loans. Bob, we're going to have to leave it there, but let's keep in touch on this. We'll get you back on, and let's really work on these campaigns, because it is so important. We believe in free markets, but I really don't think that our UK utilities and infrastructure should be majority owned by overseas shareholders who are charging huge amounts of interest on their loans. Thank you very much, Bob Seeley, MP for the Isle of Wight, for those thoughts. The time is approaching 10:46. This is, of course, Tice Talk. We are almost through. We're getting through the first hour of my 3-hour show, and we are listening to Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. The time is 10:49, and I seem to have struck a bit of a nerve, a bit of a chord, because guess what? I've got some slightly frustrated, not very happy customers of Southern Water on. We've got a tweet here saying customers pay for water treatment, not dumping. We must be due a rebate, ? Very good point. Someone else suggesting that they can whistle for their direct debit. I can't comment on that. Obviously, you've got to pay your legal dues. But I think the point is, the whole issue is, what I want to do on my Sunday Spotlights is to highlight issues that I think are wrong, that I think need challenging, where there needs to be proper accountability. And I can see with some of these corporate issues that actually there's real wrongdoing. There's another tweet coming in here. One of the first strategies during war is to take out the enemy's infrastructure, such as water, electricity, and logistics. And it's not right that we should be exposing these critical parts of our infrastructure to majority overseas ownership. So that is absolutely clear. And I'm delighted that we've got Mike, I think, in Paris on the line to talk about Southern Water. Mike, are you there? Good morning to you.
Yes, I am, Richard. Good morning to you.
Perhaps you work for Southern Water, I don't know.
No, I'm retired, but I have my own water supply, thank goodness.
Lucky you.
Absolutely. Yes, the point I wanted to make was that when the water utilities were sold off by the government, 89% of the shares were held as nominee shares by two banks in London. Now, who were the 89% of the nominees? Were they the government? Were they their friends? Who knows?
Yeah, well, what I do know in this particular case is back in 2007, Southern Water was actually owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland. And of course, when it got into a financial pickle, it had to sell it off. And that's when this transaction took place. And a majority of overseas owners acquired it, including this Chinese billionaire. But I think it's the same across so many of the utilities. And as I said before, I mean, fundamentally, do you think there should be any private ownership of our utilities, or do you think they should all be back in the public ownership? I mean, that's a sort of fundamental question.
They should have always been in public ownership. It's a public utility.
Yeah, that's
you can't live without it.
And so, Mike, you're very lucky with your own private water supply. Would you, for example, allow less than 50% of private ownership, for example, amongst UK pension funds that are looking for long-term income streams? Would that be acceptable to you, or do you think are you rigid about the 100%?
Well, I believe that it's a public utility and it should be in the public's hands, which is 100% of the population, not 50.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is the debate, and these utilities have been in a sense in private hands for so long. I think we've sort of lost sight of it, and prices relentlessly go one way, don't they, Mike? And it's never down, basically. It's always up, sometimes in line with inflation, sometimes more than inflation. And I think fundamentally people don't mind paying for a great service, for great quality, for great reliability.
Indeed.
But if actually, pipes continually leak, sewage is continually being dumped into the sea, and we're not just talking one or two transgressions, the odd accident. In this case, we're talking about thousands and thousands of transgressions over more than a decade and continual series of fines. And I think actually we've really got to put it back on the political agenda. You heard Bob Seeley there. He's very engaged in it. And if you feel strongly about this, Mike, I hope you'll write to your MP, because we've got to discuss this. It's got to come back to Parliament. I just don't think it's acceptable.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, Richard.
Well, look, thank you very much for your thoughts, and what a lucky chap you are having your own water supply. You're probably going to tell me next that you've got your own solar panels and wind turbine, and therefore you're basically self-sufficient.
Absolutely not.
Well, maybe that's another story. Thank you very much for calling, Mike, for those thoughts. He's a lucky man with his own water supply, but of course, Southern Water has over 1 million customers, and I think there's quite a few people who are not very happy. If you've got some thoughts on this issue of who should be owning our public our utilities, our critical infrastructure, give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Text us on 87222. Tweet us. We're trying to read out some tweets, and hopefully you're still watching on TV as well. So much to discuss. In the second hour, we're going to be coming on to our big Sunday debate about online anonymity. But it has been a busy weekend also here in London. There were numerous demonstrations across central London yesterday. There was, of course, inevitably Extinction Rebellion. And I saw just dozens and dozens of police vans and lots of BBC coverage of Extinction Rebellion. But actually, there was also a very big march, a freedom march that started in Hyde Park. I think it ended down near Clapham Common. And guess what? Of course, no reporting of that whatsoever. A campaign marching to get our civil liberties back, to go back as before the COVID crisis. It seems strange that so often this is not reported. Tanya Buxton, she tweeted that she was on this march and that there were huge numbers, but again, just not covered, not reported. And I think that is so important. We've got to make sure there's real awareness, real understanding of the anxiety about getting our civil liberties back completely. Now, there has, of course, been a lot of sporting activity going on over the weekend, and I was slightly disappointed that Liverpool only drew 1-1 with Chelsea yesterday. But goodness me, you're happy if you're a Manchester City fan. But some of you, if any of you are Arsenal fans, give us a call about your thoughts on that 5-0 losing. And we've got a caller from Hertfordshire, Charlie, who's calling, I think, about the utilities and the electricity companies. Charlie, good morning. Welcome to Talk Radio. What are your thoughts on this issue? Hi.
Hi, is that Richard?
It is indeed. You're on the radio. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, well, just quickly to correct that, I don't live in Hertfordshire anymore. I live in Derby.
Oh, right, Derby. What's going on in Derby? Are you happy with your utilities in Derby?
Absolutely not, no. I think we need to get back to... I'm a very free market person. I'm very much a person who believes in the free market and what it can do for society. However, when it comes to basic necessities for living, then I think we need to have some top-down control on this.
Great. You want greater control, greater certainty from the government, because it is a critical part of all our livelihoods, whether it's water, electricity, energy, gas. That's where you're coming from.
I'm not even sure whether it's government control, but there needs to be some kind of centralized control on the price, is what I'm saying, because these companies are absolutely taking absolute mickey out of all of us.
Yeah, well, certainly there's no question, Charlie, that the prices have been rising. They claim it's for investment. But there is actually regulation. I think all of these different sectors do have regulation to work on the price, but it doesn't seem to be working. Charlie, thank you so much for your call. We're approaching the top of the hour. We've been talking this morning about Afghanistan, my Sunday spotlight on Southern Water and public utilities. You're listening to Tice Talk. This is, of course, the home of common sense. It is Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV.
Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 11, I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops arrive back in the UK. Thousands are evacuated from their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. And a triumph in Tokyo. Hannah Cockcroft smashes her own world record at the Paralympics. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops were flown out of Kabul airport. The final RAF plane left at around 9:25 last night following efforts to evacuate those who were at risk from the Taliban. The Prime Minister said it's a moment to reflect on the military's achievements as he paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
UK troops and officials have worked round the clock to a remorseless deadline in harrowing conditions. They have expended all the patience and care and thought they possess to help people in fear for their lives.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. The State Department has urged all American citizens to stay away from the area, where around 170 people were killed in a bombing on Thursday. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region, and the American president has warned those living there to prepare for the worst.
Ida is turning into a very, very dangerous storm. I need not tell you. Just got another briefing from the Hurricane Center, and as you know, it's now heading straight for right toward Louisiana. We have to do everything we can to prepare the people in the region and make sure we're ready to respond.
The drinks firm Heineken is to pour £38 million worth of funding into its UK pubs and generating 500 new jobs. The company says the investment will go towards 700 of its star pubs and bars by the end of the year, with at least 80 pubs on high streets and suburban areas getting major makeovers. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. This brings Paralympics GB medal tally to 21 gold, 18 silver and 17 bronzes so far on day 5 of the competition. And your weather, dry and sunny spells for most places today with some cloud in the northeast, highs of 22 degrees. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the second hour of Tice Talk. The time is 11:03, and as I look outside, it is still grey. It is still gloomy out there. I hope the weather's a little better with you. We've been talking about my big Sunday spotlight, Southern Water. Carol, she tweeted in that only UK companies should own any of our infrastructure. I think actually Carol's onto something there. We've really got to understand this. So as we move into the second hour, we're moving on to the big Sunday debate. And this week, I'm posing the question, should we ban online anonymity? Because the reality is, on these social media platforms, it's great to have debate, it's great to have discussion, but so often it moves into really quite vile, vitriolic, aggressive, sometimes threatening, sometimes slanderous, sometimes libelous activity. And I sort of think, wouldn't it be nice? And maybe, look, maybe I'm just being a bit ideological and naive. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have a more civilized, respectful, welcoming differences of opinion? And in a sense, we can't go back, but pre-social media, I just sort of don't think that it was quite as aggressive and as abusive when you were having debates and discussions face to face. And in reality, I mean, certainly my own experience, when I walk down the street, I get people coming up to me saying, thank you for what you did, keep up the good work. I almost never get abuse. There was some bloke who cycled past once and I was chatting to someone and then they said, stab him, which wasn't terribly friendly. But, you know, most of the time, face to face, you don't get the abuse. You don't get that sort of, that vitriol. And I just wonder if we could, how do we get to a situation where there's less stress, less anxiety caused by discussions online? And if that was the case, then would that mean more people get involved, in particular more young people with new ideas, with good ideas? Now, in a sense, that maybe that is just too, it's too sort of dreamland. What are the pluses? What are the minuses? What are your experiences, listeners, viewers, when you discuss things online? Or have you given up? Have you been put off by the tone of the discourse? I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts, your views as to whether we should ban online anonymity or whether actually there are certain situations where it's important, it's necessary, it's a good thing. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by one of the greatest advocates of debate, discussion, ideas, free speech. Baroness Claire Fox is the founder and director of the Academy of Ideas and a brilliant speaker, probably one of the greatest speakers of common sense in the House of Lords. And I'm delighted that she's with us this morning to talk through this and to put forward some of the issues in and around this debate. Claire, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this Sunday. What are your thoughts on this question? Because you know you live and breathe freedom of speech and debate. I'm really keen for our listeners to understand your thoughts on this.
Thanks for having me on the show, Richard, and congratulations on the show. You started off by saying, should we ban anonymity? So, of course, I draw your attention to the fact that the last thing I want to do is to ban something else. I don't want, in the name of free speech or more civil discussion, to have a situation where big tech companies are able to say, you're not allowed to come on here because you're anonymous. I absolutely recognize the toxic atmosphere that you're describing, of course. There's particularly prevalence on social media, and you know, anyone who's been on the receiving end of trolling or, you know, those kind of vicious attacks, you know, you want somehow to cleanse the space, yeah. But it's the price we pay for a rather rambunctious, I can't even say it, lively public square, I think, in terms of social media. But just let's consider why people are anonymous as well. You and I both know that many people in professional life who will have voted, for example, to leave the European Union were treated with such contempt in society that they couldn't even professionally come out. And I kind of called them in an article for The Spectator, the secret Brexiteers, you know, people who'd sidle up and say,
plenty of those.
I agree with you, I voted leave, but I can't come out. And they might have been, you know, a kind of secret Brexiteer on social media, mightn't they? They might have wanted to join in that conversation, but not anyone know that they were head of the history department at a university where they were going to be treated pretty badly.
So they're essentially sort of victims of the cancel culture.
Yeah, if they come out. I think quite a lot of people use anonymity for that reason. It's a reflection of a kind of form of self-censorship that's come around through our intolerance about certain ideas. Gender critical feminists are in exactly the same position at the moment, where they're often absolutely you know, a real attempt to get them cancelled in the arts world, in academia, if they don't go along with a particular version of trans rights and so on and so forth. So people use anonymity that way. Sometimes it might just be young people who don't want to admit that to their parents that they're gay, but they want to join in the conversation. So I think we have to be more tolerant of anonymity. The second thing I wanted to point out, I mean, by the way, there is an element of cowardice in that, of course. You know, I want whistleblowers to not have to hide behind anonymity.
Yes.
But your suggestion was that it's the anonymous accounts that are the most vicious, and that can be true. It's also the case that some of the worst attacks on, that I found personally can come from big names. I know their names, got hundreds of thousands of followers. They're perfectly prepared to say who they are, and they're also perfectly prepared to say some pretty vicious and damaging things, or they can say something that almost lets off an army of kind of cancelers and trollers. You know what I mean? They
Yes,
kind of
absolutely.
give them permission, and I know who they are, so it's not anonymity quite that is the issue for me.
Interesting. And of course, sometimes, and I've experienced exactly the same, and sometimes it actually sort of veers towards being sort of slanderous and libelous, and which can have a real impact, particularly if you've got sort of business activities. And it's interesting, actually, Claire, we've got a tweet in here from Nigella who says, sometimes you have to take into account that you're making some people very vulnerable to real life attacks if they give out their real names. It works both ways, and unfortunately, and I think that sort of backs up what you're saying, is that for some people it is too difficult for a variety of reasons to give out their real name.
And it's also the case, the reason I'm very anxious about this at the moment is because the government are bringing in an online safety bill, an online harms bill, which I because now I'm in this extraordinary position of being in the Lords, who'd have ever thought it, but they are using this sort of atmosphere, this toxic atmosphere online, as an excuse in a way to bring in some very illiberal and censorious policing of the online world. And so I'm particularly anxious not to encourage that, because I do understand that. I mean, whenever I kind of say this online harms bill is really going to be a censorship tool, and it really will give big tech and Ofcom the ability, and they say it themselves, to ban and censor and police lawful but offensive speech. They even say the word lawful but offensive, or as deemed offensive. Now, of course, I might think, great, I can now report all those horrible trolls. I can say, look, so-and-so said this, all these anonymous, with silly names accounts. I mean, I've got some, I'd love to name and shame them, because, they are literally the bane of my life online.
Yes.
I'd love to be able to do that, but I realize that the price of freedom has to be that we are prepared to say that despite how horrible some of this conversation is, that's what free speech is like. You have to put up with the rough and the smooth in a way, and you can't expect that everything can go your way. And so I do take the view that, unpleasant though it can be, bullying though it can be, and even as you say, it might even affect one's reputation. It is unpleasant. But I think we have to say, if we believe in free speech, we're prepared to put up with that without the state, the government, big tech or Ofcom deciding who it is that needs to be kicked off, turfed out, or forcing them to come out and give their real name. Because I think that the freedom to be anonymous is also important.
Interestingly, and actually you used the word freedom there, Claire, and we've got a tweet in here from an anonymous Twitter account holder called Freedom Citizen, and who says banning online is another way to curtail free speech and silence dissenters. So that really backs up your view, your thoughts. I guess essentially what you're saying is that if we want to engage in the online space, in the online public square of debate and discussion, basically we're going to have to take it on the chin and have broad shoulders, and we will get some scars on our back as part of that process.
Yeah, but I mean, I really liked what you started off saying, which is it is different offline, isn't it? And in fact, as I said, some well-known public commentators who've been incredibly rude about me online, I then kind of bump into, at some event, and they're rather sheepish, if not a little polite, because I think it's what we've got to realize is that the online world isn't the real world. And I'd say that to anyone who thinks that even though we're doing Zoom, and Zoom is a fantastic technology, and it means I can now be on your show this morning.
Yes.
But it's still not the same as real life, and we are a bit face to face. But the reason I'm saying that is because real life really is different. We organised this Battle of Ideas at one-day event recently, and we've got another big one coming up in October, and we got real people into a real room to have real debates. And let me tell you, it was quite robust and quite lively, and people said things that were, but they weren't rude. You know, they were. It wasn't like the way that people feel that they can lash out. And I think that what I would say is that the problem we've got is not so much the online world, is that we've given permission to demonize certain people. And that's why I was using the example of Brexit. But, you know, you can be demonized and called a racist if you voted to leave the European Union. You can be delegitimized and called somebody who is, you know, a conspiracy theorist. And there are plenty of real conspiracy theorists without calling everyone else it. If you challenge some of the anti-lockdown measures, some of the illiberal laws that have been brought in to deal with coronavirus. And it's that kind of way of dismissing people, calling them out like that I think is our biggest problem. That's an offline problem as well as an online one.
Well, that's fantastic. Claire, thank you so much for those thoughts. Absolutely fascinating. In a sense, with real debate, people seem to be less aggressive, less abusive. It seems to be slightly cowardly to be vitriotic and full of vile abuse online. Claire Fox, thank you so much indeed for those thoughts. Absolutely fascinating. We've got thoughts coming in. If you've got thoughts, give us a call, 0344 499 1000, about this debate. Should we be banning online anonymity or adjust it in some way? The time is 11:16. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. The time is 11:19 and we've been discussing in the second hour of my show the big debate. Should we or should we not ban online anonymity, in particular, for example, on Twitter? And amusingly, we've had a number of tweets coming in, which I'll read out later, from anonymous accounts, but with some really sensible thoughts and points of view. And I'm delighted now, as we continue this discussion to the half hour, that we've got Stephen Kinsella, OBE, who is the founder of the Clean Up the Internet campaign, to discuss this issue, because I think it is important, and maybe there is a sort of a halfway house where we can encourage more sensible, respectful, courteous debate rather than the sort of the aggressive, rude debate that goes on. And I remember some wise words from my late uncle, who said, when you get cross, whether you're replying to a letter or an email, and in today's world to a tweet, maybe the answer is do it in draft and then sleep on it and see how it looks first thing in the morning. And actually, it's really good advice, because very often you may just tone it down and you may not regret it as much. But Stephen Kinsella, a very good morning to you. We've been discussing with Baroness Fox this issue, this important issue of, in a sense, the relationship between freedom of speech, the importance of open debate, the importance sometimes you've got the right to offend and be offended, but also the problems with the abuse, the vitriol that you often see in the sort of the online public square. Thank you for joining us. I'd be really interested in your thoughts about whether is the situation right at the moment, or is there much more to be done, and what's your campaign, your group aiming to achieve?
Well, thanks, Richard, and it's good to meet you. I was listening to your debate with Claire a few minutes ago, and I think between the two of you, you did nail the problem. How do we strike that balance, as you say? On the one hand, we're all, and people like Claire in particular, are very concerned, obviously, to preserve the freedom for people to be able to express themselves. And so that is one freedom that's very important. On the other hand, and as you said, yes, we have to be robust sometimes and do, take some of this stuff on the chin. But because of the immediacy of the communication, people do sometimes come out with stuff that, on reflection, or as Claire said, if they met you face to face, they might not express in such strong terms. So how do we also protect all of us, our rights to shield ourselves from some of this vitriol and some of these communications? And that's what we're looking to do with the Clean Up the Internet campaign.
And how are you specifically trying to do that? Are you working through towards some form of legislation? Are you liaising with the social media groups? I, for example, to be honest, I was pretty disappointed that Twitter wouldn't send anybody to discuss this on the show this morning. I thought that was a bit of a cop-out. What are you trying to do? Who are you working with?
Well, I mean, I think we all share your disappointment there, Richard. I mean, we've all tried to get them to speak to us over time. I've just penned a letter a couple of weeks ago to Jack Dorsey and some of his colleagues because they came out recently with a claim. You remember all the abuse there was around the Euro finals?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
That the England players got. And Twitter later came out with a claim that 99% of that abuse was not from anonymous accounts. Now, that's just a claim. They don't make the data available, and so we've asked them to share that data with us because we have good grounds really for being skeptical that is the case. But look, in an ideal world, these platforms would regulate themselves. You were talking earlier today about utilities, the discussion you had on utilities. In some ways, some of these platforms are rather like utilities. I mean, they're ubiquitous. We need them. We can't really.
They are indeed. They're essentially part of our critical infrastructure now, really. We've
exactly.
become so dependent on them.
Yeah, and it's not like the water. We're not saying we should take them back into public ownership, but certainly we should be able to expect that they apply standards and controls that protect the rest of us as citizens. So in an ideal world, yes, they would self-regulate. They'd bring their houses into order. I fear that what is going to be needed is legislation. I don't see us getting the changes we need. Claire mentioned the online safety bill that's coming through. That's the hook for us. We're going to campaign for some wording in that bill to, and I can explain briefly what our proposal is, obviously. We think that we shouldn't be focusing on what people say so much because it's rather difficult to regulate content and speech.
Right.
But give us all powers to choose not to hear from accounts who might be abusing us.
Okay, so I mean, obviously on Twitter, for example, you can block people. That's quite easy. Slightly laborious if you get a load of grief, but you can do that. You're looking for more than that, are you?
Yeah, well, let's take Twitter. Twitter's a good example. So on Twitter, if you're a very eminent person, you can have this blue tick, so you're verified. Now, our proposal is that all of us who want to be verified should be allowed to be verified. And that would mean that you then would be able to see if I was verified. And if you're a public figure who wants to get your message out, but is really a bit disturbed by some of the replies you get, you could say from now on, I'm just going to choose not to hear from accounts who have not got verified. So I can still communicate to everybody and I can see who's verified, but without having to block them individually, just with a single click, I could say from now on, I don't want to receive replies from people who are not verified.
And so, for example, would that mean that you could block receiving anything from anonymous accounts?
Absolutely, you could do that, and you would have that power, and you could turn them on or off. Let's say, for instance, you come on your show today and you raise a topic that's very controversial, and you think, I'd just like to mute all that noise for a time.
Yes.
Because I know I'm going to get a lot of abuse for a period, and I don't want to have to sift through it to pick out the ones that I would like to see. So yes, it's giving more controls to individual users really to sort of curate what they get to see and hear.
And that sounds like an interesting sort of middle ground. And is there more that could be done at the service level, at the online platforms themselves, in terms of making it easier for people if you think that you've been, completely wrongly libeled or slandered, to make it easier to go to them and say, look, this is wrong. It needs sorting out. They need challenging. It needs taking down. They need suspending or something. I often get the feeling that at the moment is too difficult, too slow, too cumbersome.
I mean, I think you're right. It's all those things. It is too slow and too difficult. And of course, the other problem is that places all of the power with the platforms. You have to go and petition the platform, and you have to get their attention and persuade them that they should do something to help you. Whereas what we're talking about is giving us all the tools from the outset to control what we hear. I mean, there are some very good companies active in this space. Somebody you should definitely talk to is a company called Signify. They've been working with the football authorities to track down the trolls. But from talking to them, you can see how difficult it is actually if someone really is clever and conceals themselves behind an anonymous account. How do you actually determine who they are?
I mean, it's clear that there's a lot to be done, and from what you're saying, and it seems that you'd like to see the online platforms be much more open, much more welcoming to change. I mean, obviously they've got shareholders and they're always trying to boost their account numbers, but in a sense we're all learning in the space because it is all so new. It's only, whatever it is, 10 to 15 years old, much of this stuff. But I just feel that we want more people, more young people to get involved, rather than to be put off because it is so aggressive, so difficult. And listeners and viewers, if you've got thoughts on this, give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your experiences, or send in some tweets. I'll read some out a bit later. Stephen, do you feel that there's much more that these platforms need to do to work with their users?
Yeah, I think a couple of quick points. One is that you rightly say, well, this is relatively new, although again, 10 to 15 years old. What we've seen is they're capable of moving very quickly when they want to. But when there's something that they see as difficult, they find excuses for not moving very fast. The other is that in terms of the politics, this is very much a cross-party issue. This shouldn't be a partisan issue.
For sure.
Our campaign has support from politicians right across the spectrum. So I think that there's general agreement that, we as users are entitled to a bit more respect, and we're entitled to expect that the platforms do more to protect us and just make the online experience a more pleasant one than it has been lately.
I think that's right. I mean, because I just think that will encourage more people putting their head above the parapet and getting involved. If you get a complete sort of pile on because you say something that's a bit controversial, it's just so easy to say, well, I'm not going to bother. And I do think that there is the most telling evidence, of course, is the fact that face to face, people are much more friendly, much more respectful of differing views. You don't get that sort of cowardly abuse online. I think surely that's what we've got to head towards. Stephen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Keep up the good work. I'm sure there are there are better ways, there are better solutions, and I do think it's incumbent on the platforms, to talk about this, to engage in this debate. So if there's anybody listening who works for any of these platforms, or if you've got any mates, friends that work for these platforms, tell them to step up to the plate. Tell them to give us a buzz. Happily get them on the show to talk about this, to come back to, because I think it's really, really important that there's more debate and more discussion. Well, we've been talking about the big debate, should we or shouldn't we ban online anonymity. Coming up after the news, we're going to be going and talking about GPs, whether or not you can see a GP face to face, how long it takes, and I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts, lots of experiences on that. So give us a call, 0344 499 1000. The time's 11:30. It's time for the news. You've been listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops were flown out of Kabul. And a triumph in Tokyo, Hannah Cockcroft smashes her own world record at the Paralympics. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops were flown out of Kabul airport. The final RAF plane left at around 9:25 last night, following efforts to evacuate those who were at risk from the Taliban. The Prime Minister says it's a moment to reflect on the military's achievements as he paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
UK troops and officials have worked round the clock to a remorseless deadline in harrowing conditions. They have expended all the patience and care and thought they possess to help people in fear for their lives.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. This brings Paralympics GB medal tally to 21 gold, 18 silver and 17 bronzes so far on day 5 of the competition. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Richard Tice's show, Tice Talk, here on Talk Radio. The time is 11:33. We've been discussing the big Sunday debate in the second hour of whether or not online anonymity is a good thing or a bad thing. And the tweets have been coming in thick and fast, and we will be going to those later on the hour. But now it's time to talk about GPs, surgeries, and whether or not you've been able to get to see your GP at all face to face or relatively quickly on the telephone or on Zoom. And I'm sure that people have got lots of thoughts and experiences on this, whether it's your own experience, whether it's a family member or a friend who've either had a great service and been seen within a day or two. Tell us that good news. It's always important to celebrate the successes. Or have you had an absolute shocker? Have you had that story? And I've heard lots of anecdotes of people who phoned up sort of 8:05 in the morning. They're about number 35 in the queue. They spend 25 minutes waiting to be for the phone to be picked up and answered, to be told, yeah, you can have a phone call consultation in about 2 weeks' time. Stand by the phone. It might be in the morning. it might be in the afternoon. So many anecdotes like that. And I'm really keen to hear people's thoughts and views. And in a sense, will it ever change from this? And clearly there is some real merit in having a form of triage to focus those who actually a quick online consultation is perfect, just the job, saving face-to-face appointments for those more needy. But the real question is, have we got it right at the moment? And in a hopefully sort of post-COVID world, as we learn to live with COVID, where's it going to go from here? And I'm delighted that we're joined this morning by Dr. Lawrence Buckman, who's the former chair of the British Medical Association GPs Committee and a North London GP, and therefore incredibly experienced as to what's going on currently in his own surgery, but also what he's hearing from colleagues in the industry and where this may go. So, Lawrence, a very good morning to you on this Sunday. Thanks for being with us. And
morning.
Where do you see the situation at the moment? You know, I'm sure you do. I hear anecdotes from people. I'm lucky enough I haven't needed to go to the doctor for a fair bit. But where do you think it is at the moment, this situation of phone triage, potentially sort of Zoom triage relative to face-to-face appointments? And where do you see it going?
I think the anecdotes are all true. Most of us are very uncomfortable with the access that we can offer patients. When I try and get through to my GP, believe it or not, I have one, I can't get an appointment either. And it's exactly the same as you described. You're 30th in the queue and you never get to the top, because when you do, there's obviously a chasm between the number of appointments available and the number of humans able to deliver service. The fact is, this has been cooking for a long, long time. And we were pointing this out 20 years ago, that there was going to be an inevitable retirement bulge in the early 21st century. And that indeed has happened. That means that there are not enough doctors and nurses working in the health service. That's the first thing. Right. And that was obvious. It was inevitable. And governments of various colours have done very little about it, apart from talk about it. Nothing's actually happened. And that's the first thing, and the retirements. So the next thing, of course, is that the COVID situation has done two things. Firstly, it's made doctors have to devote quite a bit or even all of their energy to vaccinating, and therefore not enough appointment time for people who need it. Thirdly, and this is part of COVID, you have actually to clean the surgery every time somebody comes in. So it is in the practice's best interest, if they can, to deal with stuff on the phone. And then you come down to how many humans are there on the end of a phone? If you don't want your receptionists acting as the triage process, and I quite understand why patients and doctors don't want that, you have to wait until the doctor has a moment to talk to you, to sort out whether your problem is really urgent or not really urgent. So the answer is the anecdotes are true.
Okay, that's very helpful, Lawrence. So in a sense, we need to find solutions to the problems. That's always my sort of motto in life. Don't just bring me a problem, bring me a solution. And is it too simplistic to say, well, I get the point about people retiring, and some people retire because it's age-related or frankly, because they've just been driven mad by the bureaucracy of the whole setup. Is there a way of encouraging medics, nurses, doctors, surgeons who have recently retired, perhaps to come back into the system in some form, some way, to help, even on a part-time basis, even to help with this triage? You know, I love technology. I'm a great fan of it. You know, most of the time it works. But surely we can do better and find a solution to this, because we all know it takes years to train doctors. So in a way, we've got to encourage more capacity. You know, I'm a great believer, surprise, surprise, in the word reform. You know, it does what it says on the tin. How do we encourage more capacity back in the system to reduce these waiting lists?
Well, during the COVID pandemic, we did precisely what you've just said. NHS 111 created a national COVID service for the whole of England and recruited hundreds, actually 1,500 GPs to come back into the service. I was one of them, who actually processed patients who appeared to have COVID. Now, obviously, quite a lot of them didn't have COVID, but some did. And it acted as a sort of expert triage service for the NHS, not for an individual practice. And that worked very well. I can appreciate it was probably seen as quite expensive, although the pay was well below what one might normally expect as a locum. But many of us did it because we felt we should and could. And there is no cogent argument for not keeping that service going, maybe not calling it a COVID service anymore, but having a sort of quick access service for those people. Firstly, they're not sure if they need care at all. And if they do think they need it, for getting it from somebody who can have access to their records. And that's exactly what we had on the National COVID Service. So
that sounds a very practical, sensible solution, which surely should be extended going forward. Now, you just touched on something that could be a real issue, and perhaps you can help my listeners and viewers on, which is, of course, if you've got doctors carrying out vaccinations, then that's consuming time that they need really to see day-to-day patients with the usual range of issues. I know that pharmacies, I think I read recently, are being engaged to carry out much more of the vaccination program. And of course, we're potentially moving into the booster program. Is the system and are the leaders on top of this? Is the thinking that the pharmacies will carry out more of the booster program to free up space amongst GP surgeries?
I hope so. There appears to be a lot of talking, but not much happening. There clearly is going to be a booster campaign, and there should be. And it's logical for GPs to be involved with that. But as you rightly observe, if I'm vaccinating, I'm not delivering healthcare. And we have a cohort, a large number of lay vaccinators trained during the beginning of the vaccination scheme. And really, we should be using them to vaccinate in large venues. And of course, our pharmacist colleagues can be doing an awful lot, and they are, to deliver healthcare vaccinations for the booster service. So the answer is, there is a cohort and it should be used. The idea of putting it all back to GPs and their nurses is, in my view, unfair on the patients who want to see a doctor for some reason.
Clearly, and indeed, when I was vaccinated by a former stage manager from a theatre who retrained as a vaccinator. Lawrence, stay with us because we've got a caller, Catherine, who's got an experience that she wants to share with us about trying to get hold of her GP that I just think would be interesting for us. So hopefully we've got Catherine on the line there. Catherine, a very good morning. Thanks for calling. What's your experience? You wanted to mention. Yeah, great pleasure.
Yes, I'm actually complaining because I've had this illness since March. My knee has been agony and infection, and I'm always referred to different sort of specialists and everything. They always give me different things. And on Thursday, I basically had a throbbing leg, very heated. I thought I had a clot in my leg, and my knee's agony. I can't actually walk. So I spent 2 days in the A&E. And then when I phoned the doctor, they said to me, we don't have any appointment. You're going to have to phone back at 2 o'clock when we release more appointments. I said, this is ridiculous. So I went back to the A&E. They've done ultrasound. They've done blood tests and everything. And they said, you've got to be referred back to your GP. There is no one in the surgery. I can't even talk to a doctor. And if you go to a doctor, you never see the same person. So you've got to go through the whole history of your illnesses. And now I can't walk. And early 60s, I can't walk. Okay, so what do I do?
Catherine, that's such a fascinating, albeit painful experience for you. Thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like you're on a sort of merry-go-round of passing the buck. And in a sense, this is not an online surgery, let's be clear. But Lawrence, is that the sort of experience, the sort of challenge that the system faces that's getting worse at the moment?
Yes, she's quite right. She should have been seen straight away. She's quite right to be annoyed. She's been moved round and round and round. And the answer is, clearly, her practice doesn't have enough access time. Before you get to the point of seeing a doctor, you should be talking to a doctor or a nurse to establish what's wrong with you. Because her problem sounds to me fairly acute, and that shouldn't be pushed into a queue. That should be dealt with by a doctor on the day.
Yes.
And that process of doing that, because there's so many people at the same time wanting that service, quite rightly, it's overwhelmed, and it's overwhelmed largely because there's not enough people. And her particular practice clearly has an organisation problem in that they can't filter out people like her who can't wait another day before they're sorted. I mean, she shouldn't be getting that service. But the answer is many practices are struggling to deliver because demand has risen.
Yes.
And inevitably, when demand rises and access falls, people like her who do need to be seen and cannot wait end up in A&E where they shouldn't be in the first place. And that you get this, as you say, a merry-go-round, which is very bad for them and hasn't helped her knee one iota.
And are we in a situation where, in a sense, this becomes the new normal? And my sort of question to you, Lawrence, is I hear lots of anecdotes about phone calls, but you and I, for viewers, we're using this great thing called Zoom that none of us had heard of 18 months ago. Are many GP surgeries using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something in order to be able to actually see patients and see patients online as a sort of halfway house? And is that any better, or actually does that make the problem worse?
It does help for some things. Very often you actually have to touch the patient, or even worse, listen to their chest or feel their tummy. You can't do any of that remotely.
Sure.
It's slightly better than a telephone call because you do actually get a feeling about what they're talking about. And for some skin diseases, for example, you can get an impression of how they are. Most practices have that system installed within their general practice computer system. So they could use it if they needed to.
Well,
many patients, on the other hand, haven't got software that's compatible.
Sure.
Many practices have got ones that will only work with Chrome and won't work with Safari.
So there's technical challenges. I suspected there might be, but I do wonder whether that's a sort of halfway house. Lawrence, time is marching against us, but thank you so much for those thoughts. I know we'll be coming back to it. I think this is a huge ongoing issue, and there are lots of problems that really do need some fast solutions. Time is moving on. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and we've got the tweets and the calls are coming in thick and fast, both about the big debate about online anonymity and also about GPs, the difficulties of getting into see GPs. And thanks to Lawrence Buckman, a GP from North London, for his thoughts on that. A tweet here from Toby, so that's not anonymous. None of the GPs in my surgery work full-time, only 3 days a week, so it's not surprising it's difficult to get an appointment. Question, why don't we have more full-time GPs in our surgeries? And we've got a caller, Graham from Bermondsey, who's got some thoughts on this. Graham, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. Great programme. Just to say that in 2008, the BMA conference agreed to restrict the number of places at medical schools and also agreed on a complete ban on opening new medical schools. So it's hardly surprising we are where we are.
I just find this, I've heard this before, Graham. I find it absolutely astonishing, this. I mean, we know how long it takes to train doctors, and it's bizarre, isn't it, that I'm hearing stories that there are many incredibly bright students, you know, with A's and A stars, coming out their ears, who are being denied places in medical school, even though we've got a shortage. And yet there are so many students, and this is another bugbear of mine, we'll come back to another time, who are doing, frankly, Mickey Mouse ology courses that none of us have ever heard of, when actually we want the brightest and the best people doing incredibly worthwhile things, like training to be a doctor, a medic. I don't understand it. Where did this come from? What's your view as to, was it driven by ideology? Was it driven by money or something else?
Well, I'm reading from the BMJ website, and delegates to the conference agreed to restrict the number of places at medical schools to avoid overproduction of doctors with limited career opportunities.
So I really find it utterly inexplicable. But the real challenge, of course, as we know, Graham, is that it takes years to train a doctor.
Absolutely.
My own brother, I think it's 5 years.
And this is doctors themselves who are stopping the supply.
It's bizarre. It sounds like some form of cartel, but I probably shouldn't. I need to be careful about that. But anyway, Graham, thank you so much for that. It is a really good point. We should be welcoming. I can't see the reason not to have training as many doctors as possible. It's always going to be a fantastic skill. There's always going to be a demand for it in a variety of walks of life. I think we've got a call, Mark in Birmingham, actually talking about online censorship. Mark, good morning to you.
Morning, mate. How are you?
Very good, thank you. What are your thoughts on the censorship debate?
I just wanted to say, on the face of it, it sounds like ID, how can I say, social media ID is a good idea. Everybody knows who's who and what they're saying, and,
yes,
and it's a way of checking. However, if you look at certain platforms, I'm not going to mention the name of them, but certain well-known international platforms of a left-wing leaning have been known for heavily censoring conservative speech. So I think that there's a concern there. I think it's, to be honest with you, I think it's almost like, on the face of it, it sounds good, but it's kind of a thinly veiled attack on human rights.
Yeah, interesting.
That's what I'm getting from it. And I think one of the things I would say is, if you look at the news, for example, you listen to the news in the evening and they tell you something, you've got the ability now to be able to check what they're saying is true. If you've got contacts around the world who are on social media, they can say, well, no, you're not actually being told the truth there. So social media is a very important tool that allows us to check what we're being told by the media is true, and also whether they're omitting news that they should be telling us and are not telling us for political reasons, for example.
Mark, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that call. And we've got some interesting tweets coming in on this. We've got here one, clearly anonymous. Morse code says that we actually missed the point, which is that anonymity should be removed at the service level, i.e. at the online platform rather than the public level, so that if something said that was illegal or libelous, then we can identify them via the normal legal route. Interesting thought there. We've got another call here, Leslie in Cambridge, about GP waiting time. Leslie, it is still just good morning. What are your thoughts on GP waiting times?
Good morning, Richard. Well, in my case, I overcame the hurdle of arranging to see a GP. Our surgery have a group type practice, so I travelled in my car to see a GP outside of my area, but saw the GP who assessed that I needed a hernia operation.
Right.
And I was quite relieved that I saw someone. Then a week or so later, the GP called me back to say that they needed to seek funding to perform the operation. This is the National Health seeking funding. Yeah. So he said, so that we're talking from the same hymn sheet, if these people call you up, explain to them your predicament and how you need this surgery. So I said, okay, thank you very much for the advice. Then I received an appointment at the local hospital to see a consultant.
And how long did that take out of interest, Leslie?
I don't know, it wasn't that long actually, it was a matter of weeks.
That's good.
But what the concern was at the end, Richard, I looked at the date and it said September. And the date was, I think, the 21st, Tuesday the 21st of September. I thought, brilliant, that's next month, that's amazing.
Right, but...
And then I checked with my calendar and it turns out it's September next year, 2022.
For your hernia operation, Leslie, what's going on?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. You can't wait 13 months for a hernia operation.
But this is the crisis we're in now. It's not just GPs, it's the whole National Health Service.
Well, Leslie, that's the point, and that's why, you know, I love this word. It's one of my favourite words. You can probably guess why. Reform. And things need reforming, because that's good news that Leslie was seen by a consultant within a week. It's a disaster suggesting that it would take 13 months for the operation. Simply not acceptable. Major reform is needed. Another tweet here back on the censorship debate from Joanne, who says, I use my own name, but I've no issue with people using whatever name they want. I really can't see the problem. I think that is sort of the emerging consensus about the anonymity debate. So we've had lots of thoughts, lots of views, lots of calls on this issue of online anonymity, and lots of real concerns about the waiting times for GPs. Keep the calls coming in, keep the tweets coming in. 0344 499 1000. The time is approaching 11:58, and you are listening to Tice Talk at the end of the second hour here on the home of common sense, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 12, I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops arrive back at Brize Norton. Thousands are evacuated from their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. And a triumph in Tokyo. Hannah Cockcroft smashes her own world record at the Paralympics. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops arrived back from Kabul. The final RAF plane touched down at Brize Norton this morning, carrying the British ambassador to Afghanistan and military personnel. The Prime Minister said it's a moment to reflect on the military's achievements as he paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
UK troops and officials have worked round the clock to a remorseless deadline in harrowing conditions. They have expended all the patience and care and thought they possess to help people in fear for their lives.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. The State Department has urged all American citizens to stay away from the area, where around 170 people were killed in a bombing on Thursday. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region, and the American president has warned those living there to prepare for the worst.
Ida is turning into a very, very dangerous storm. I need not tell you. Just got another briefing from the Hurricane Center, and as you know, it's now heading straight for right toward Louisiana. We have to do everything we can to prepare the people in the region and make sure we're ready to respond.
The drinks firm Heineken is to pour £38 million worth of funding into its UK pubs and generating 500 new jobs. The company says the investment will go towards 700 of its star pubs and bars by the end of the year, with at least 80 pubs on high streets and suburban areas getting major makeovers. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. This brings Paralympics GB medal tally to 22 gold, 18 silver and 17 bronzes so far on day 5 of the competition. And your weather, dry and sunny spells for most places today, with some cloud in the northeast and highs of 22 degrees. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We are now into the afternoon of Sunday the 29th of August. We've been talking about my corporate expose of Southern Water's activities. We've had the big debate about online anonymity, and we've been talking GP waiting times. A tweet in actually for Baroness Fox. Good news. She said, for every one troll out there, there are 1,000 in the silent majority who support her. JP from Cornwall. Thank you for that. Claire will be delighted. Well, we need to move on and talk about the consequences of the humiliation, the embarrassment, the disaster in Afghanistan, because in a sense, time doesn't stand still, and however difficult it is at the moment, however awful everyone feels about it, we have to keep looking forwards and thinking, well, what next? What does this look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time? And it's very raw for so many people, particularly for those families of those who gave their lives, for those soldiers who will be traumatized having been there over the last couple of weeks. But interestingly, there's an article on the front page of the Sunday Times by Christina Lamb entitled "The West Must Work with the Taliban or Repeat the Horrors of 9/11." And sometimes there's an expression in life, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer still. And, these are the difficult things that we're going to have to face up to. And I'm delighted now to discuss this and ways that we're going to have a presence in the region, and what we could do, what we should do, what we need to be thinking about looking forwards. I'm delighted to be joined by former MEP Ben Habib, who got very strong ties and family links with Pakistan. And Ben wrote a really interesting article in the Daily Express just a couple of days ago, suggesting that actually we've got to look forward. We've got to look at our ties with Pakistan and the potential for greater links, greater trade discussions, working together, more cooperation as a way of ensuring that we get some of that important leverage. Ben, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. A fascinating piece you wrote in the Express. And of course, it's difficult to look reasonably distant into the future. But, you've got great experience in this area, real close ties. Tell us your thoughts about what we need to be doing from here on.
Well, thank you, Richard. I think the first and most important thing we've got to do is learn from history. It seems that repeatedly we make the same mistakes again and again and again. And remember, the Taliban only exist because we supported the Mujahideen in their fight against the Russians. And then as soon as the Russians were defeated, we lost interest in Afghanistan. We left Afghanistan effectively in the hands of a bunch of tribal warlords who perpetrated all sorts of crimes against their own people. The Taliban actually arose in order to get a grip of the law and order situation in Afghanistan because of the vacuum created by a West that had lost interest in it. And what I really fear now, Richard, is that exactly the same thing will happen again. We will lose interest in Afghanistan. We've had 20 years there, the forever war that Biden has eventually brought to an end. We'll turn our backs on it, and it'll become introspective. It will feed on its own position. And the Taliban will do something now, if left to their own devices, which hitherto they've never had the ability to do. And it is this. It's a very powerful message. They will be able to say that they beat the United States of America. They beat the United Kingdom. They beat one of the biggest alliances in the world. And they did it, they will say, because they had God on their side. Clearly, the Taliban way must be the right way, because God must be on their side to have been able to defeat the USA and UK. And that message will resonate, not just in Afghanistan, but it'll resonate in the madrasas of Pakistan. It'll resonate with the dispossessed in Pakistan. Indeed, Richard, it will resonate with the dispossessed Muslims right across from North Africa all the way into Pakistan. A lot of dispossession, remember, created by Western military campaigns over the last 20 years. So my fear is that if we turn our back on Afghanistan, if we turn our back now on Pakistan and think, right, we're done with the 20-year forever war, we can go back to business as usual, all that we're going to create is a much more powerful militant Islam that will come back to bite us when we're not looking.
So how do we increase our ties and our links with Pakistan? Obviously, their Prime Minister has actually very strong ties with the UK, Imran Khan. What do we need to do, and how quickly, in order to regain some input, some leverage, some ties, some understanding in the region, rather than give China a completely free run?
Yeah, well, again, we've got to look back at history, and our forefathers did this incredibly well. We didn't create the British Empire. A lot of people are going to start rolling their eyes now when I talk about the empire, but we didn't create the British Empire down the barrel of a gun. We created the British Empire through enlightened commerce. We went abroad and we traded with people. That's how we did it. And we need to immediately engage with Pakistan Firstly, with Pakistan, because that is the regional economic and military powerhouse. That is what is going to determine really what happens in that region. And Liz Truss needs to get on a plane. She needs to have a cup of tea with Imran Khan, and she needs to sit down and explore trade opportunities. The UK has to befriend Pakistan. There's no point banging a drum of moral rectitude, threatening Pakistan, telling Pakistan and Afghanistan that they mustn't become militant Islam. The best way to neutralize that threat is to get engaged, trade, and get the Pakistanis, the average Pakistani, to look to the United Kingdom as a means for self-enrichment through legitimate trade. And therein lies the solution.
And Ben, I mean, Liz Truss has done a good job on trade talks. She's one of the very, very short list of cabinet ministers that I rate as having, been successful. She may be up to that, but do you think what's your view of the Foreign Office? Are they up to this sort of diplomatic challenge? Can they do this, or do they need some outside help?
Well, I think the Foreign Office clearly not up to it. Dominic Raab's opening response when he got back from holiday was that we were going to have to turn to China to bring peace to that part of the world. I mean, for goodness sake, China represents one of the biggest threats to the Western values in the world. And he's going to invite them into Pakistan, into Afghanistan to settle the situation. He might as well then just sign over Taiwan immediately to China. It was one of the daftest comments I've ever heard emerge from a cabinet secretary. And let me tell you, you and I have both heard a lot of daft comments emerge.
We have indeed, and there's a real, there's clearly a massive blame going on, and he may well be the sort of the fall guy in all of this. But of course, it's not just him. It's there's some team of senior diplomats, experienced people, and if they haven't got the expertise, do they need to bring some of our former ambassadors back in? I mean, this is incredibly important, very, very sensitive, and not easy.
It is incredibly important, and I don't know if we any longer have the depth and breadth of ability, indigenous as it were, in the United Kingdom to deal with this now. Sadly, we haven't prosecuted really a completely independent trade or foreign policy ever since we joined the European Union. But this is a great opportunity now for global Britain to take the lead. The Prime Minister takes a great deal of comfort from the supranational institutions of which the United Kingdom is member. And it was slightly disappointing to see him call a G7 meeting in the face of all the problems of the region. What he really should have done was identify immediately what are the United Kingdom's interests in this area. What can the UK independently do? Remember, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. It's a part of the world which actually speaks our language, which uses our laws, which has a great British tradition already in it. We don't need the G7. What we need is to rediscover our nimble international trading routes, and we need to champion global Britain. The whole point of Brexit, without wishing to digress, the whole point of Brexit was to be able to go abroad and do what's right for global Britain, and thereby enrich.
That's right, and that's the joy of the independence, Ben, that we've now got, is that actually we can do that as a sovereign, independent nation. And so I guess, in a sense, maybe someone like you, with your ties, your experience, your contacts, your knowledge, I mean, I think maybe you should be putting yourself forward to help, because we need all the help we can get.
Well, I'd be delighted to help in any way I can, obviously.
You better start writing your CV, sending it into the Foreign Office. But it's seriously, actually, if they haven't got the expertise, Ben, then they need to be talking to people like yourself and others who really have got the knowledge and the expertise, because
they really do. And
it's in the country's interest.
And they need to talk to people with some understanding of history of the region, because only through understanding where we've come from can you really chart a proper path forward, and go forward with a short footing. We used to have tremendous ambassadors, tremendous depth and breadth of experience, but I think that kind of died off in the 60s and 70s, and we need to rediscover it. We need to rediscover it urgently. There's a real opportunity here, Richard, for the United Kingdom to take a lead.
That's right.
We can go out there.
And I think it's so important, because I feel really uncomfortable about the idea that we just leave China a sort of free rein to increase their Belt and Road Initiative. Afghanistan has been called the Saudi Arabia of lithium, and we need to find ways, in a sense, not to give China a free rein, because otherwise they're just going to, continue in their their sort of quest for global dominance. So this is absolutely vital, and we
have
need
to
that
head
experience.
China off. We have to head China off. China is a non-ideology. It doesn't export its. It's got a very strong ideology. It doesn't export it. It sees its foreign policy purely through the dimension of trade, and it doesn't lecture its counterparties. So it is very well received in Pakistan. Even though Muslims are being prosecuted in China, the Uyghurs are being put in concentration camps and abused. That's lost on the leadership in Pakistan and Afghanistan, because actually the Chinese don't treat them like that. And we need to learn from the Chinese, funny enough. We need to be less exporting of our ideology. We need to cease exporting Western democracy. That attempt has completely failed right across the Middle East.
Yes.
What we have is complete disaster now in the Middle East as a result of Tony Blair and Cameron's firstly war in Iraq, and and then the Arab Spring.
I mean, in a sense, Ben, and we're going to have to head to the break, but in a sense, you can have, and this is a real lesson for all of us, you can have free markets and capitalism without democracy. And I think, we're all learning that. Ben, thank you so much for those thoughts. We have got to have a presence in the area. Pakistan is such a important power. People like Ben Habib, former MEP, have got such close ties. We need to draw on the experience, the knowledge, the expertise that we've got, even outside the Foreign Office, because it is in our national interest as a sovereign nation. We're going to be coming back to some calls and some tweets, but for now, it is we're approaching 12:17, and this is, of course, Tice Talk. It is still grey outside, but this is the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Radio. You've been listening to Tice Talk here in London, and it is 12:20. We've been discussing Pakistan, the role of Pakistan potentially for us to re-engage in the region. We had the big debate earlier that's triggered all sorts of tweets and thoughts about online anonymity, and the discussion about GPs has gone well. But we need now to talk lorry drivers. Yes, because you'll have read or heard stories about shortages of lorry drivers, HGV drivers emerging and growing and becoming a real issue, a real challenge. Now, I actually think that in a sense, bizarrely, this is good news, because it's moving the negotiating leverage between the lorry drivers and big business. Because over the last decade or so, from what I understand, actually lorry drivers, their real wages haven't increased relative to other trades, including in supermarkets and things, because of the significant ongoing supply of lorry drivers from the EU, and that therefore has put downward pressure on their wages. It was one of the reasons I was such a passionate Brexiteer. And we now got the situation, if there's a shortage, the way free markets work is that actually the price of that labour has to go up, and that therefore the big firms, if they want drivers, then they need to pay them a bit more. Well, I'm delighted that I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of the Federation of Wholesale Distributors, James Bealby, to discuss this issue, because actually there are, as I understand, quite a lot of factors that have contributed to this situation. James, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
This is clearly, and I know that you've been very close to this on behalf of your members for years, really. But actually, this was an issue pre-COVID, wasn't it? It's not just COVID. And in a sense, we sort of knew what was happening. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, with COVID, we've had more and more online deliveries. You know, we all take advantage of that. It's remarkably cheap. Is it just a case we've actually just got to pay the drivers more?
I think that is happening. Whether that's the correct outcome or not is a point for discussion. But I think it is largely down to COVID as opposed to Brexit. We knew this was happening from 2016, that there'd be a number of people who are EU nationals who'd be returning back to their own countries. That process has been sped up through COVID. So, and last year it was masked somewhat by the fact that lots of the economy wasn't open. So it's come to a head now, rather earlier perhaps than we thought it might. And I think businesses are not prepared. And what we are seeing is wages going up. So drivers can earn as much as £70,000. Obviously, that's great news for them. Not so good for the businesses who have to maintain pay differentials. So you've got the example within some of our members where a driver is getting paid more than a depot manager. Somebody who's responsible for P&L on a local basis is earning less than a driver. And that's not right. So businesses have to maintain pay differentials. You've also got the challenge then of the free market, and those bigger businesses are able to pay more and cannibalize labour. So it's not necessarily a good outcome. It might be good for the individual drivers on a personal basis, but in terms of business, it's not good.
Indeed. But is it just, there are other issues involved, aren't there? It's not just pay. I was contacted yesterday by someone who said that actually, you know, the reality is, you're away from home very, very long hours, often not seeing, you know, families, kids. You know, that's often a challenge. But also specifically saying, for example, during COVID, you know, lorry drivers who were essentially keeping us all fed and supplied through the crisis, the depth of the lockdowns, that actually, you know, they'd stop and have to stay overnight at service stations. But for example, facilities were shut. There were no loos. There was nothing to be able to buy or eat. So, you know, real challenges that in a sense made the job that much tougher, that much harder to bear. And so therefore maybe more people decided, well, I can get a job doing something else.
That is right. And there are structural challenges associated with the HGV drivers. So the average age of a driver in the UK is 55. Just 1% of drivers are under 25. And those need to be addressed. So you need to make it a place where people want to work, good pay, good conditions. That doesn't happen overnight. And what we and other business groups are calling for is a temporary visa to allow workers from the EU on a short-term, time-limited basis to meet the deliveries for schools, for people going back to work who need food and drink, and then ahead of Christmas. Absolutely, we need to address the issue and encourage high-paid, high-skilled jobs for people in Britain. That doesn't happen overnight. And in the meantime, we're seeing every day on the news stories about Nando's closing, a milkshake shortage, Haribo shortages, food shelves.
Absolutely. No, I mean, when it comes to Haribo shortages, then I start to pay attention because that's probably my favourite sweet. But seriously, James, I hear this call for a temporary visa, but let's remember income tax was a temporary tax in 1799 to pay for a war. Here we are 200 years later. There's sort of, in reality, I just don't believe that it would be temporary. I don't think this is my position to you, my question, supposition to you is, this isn't a government problem. This is actually an issue for businesses to sort out themselves. I heard a story yesterday, I think I read it, that one of the supermarkets, they were having to adapt and reorganise their delivery schedules. They were having to have fuller lorries and change the routes in order to respond to this. And in a sense, that's how business works. Business will always adapt. It'll have to innovate, change. When you've got problems, then basic economics is fundamentally if you've got a shortage of labour, then you've got to respond to it either by paying more or investing in capital equipment. Clearly, we haven't got driverless lorries, but it's business's problem, not the government's problem, is my observation.
Yeah, and the government would totally agree with your position. I mean, Baroness Veer, the transport minister, told a group of industry leaders that they were crying wolf about the shortage. There was nothing to see, and it was up to them to sort out. That's been consistently the message. We heard that this week from Kwasi Kwarteng. And I think, that is possible up to a point, but there is a challenge. You can't pay more if you're an SME. You don't have the profitability, and you'll get supermarkets taking drivers away, which means that those wholesalers and distributors who are supplying into schools, hospitals, care homes on a local basis won't have drivers to do that. And that is not right. The government does need to step in on that basis, because otherwise you'll see public sector food not being delivered to vulnerable people and people who require it. So
James,
I think businesses do need to look to themselves, but we need help from government. They've extended drivers' hours, for example.
And how much difference has that made?
That means that there's about 30% of extra deliveries that can be made at the end of a route. So if you're dropping, say, 12 times, you could do perhaps 15 drops. That's been really, really helpful. They've extended that until October the 3rd. But we're heading into a really, really busy period with schools going back next week, people holidaying in the UK still, workplaces going back, and then Christmas. And I think unless the government does something else to intervene, these problems aren't going to go away. Just paying people enough isn't enough. And also, they need to be trained. If there's not enough people to do those skilled roles, it's not just drivers. Sure. There's 500,000 vacancies in the food and drink supply chain. That's 13% of all total workforce within food and drink. They need to be trained. You can't just hand someone the keys and say, drive this up to Hartlepool for us. That takes time. And you need a short-term fix to meet that real challenge of shortages, businesses having to close and food not being delivered.
But presumably, with the prospect of higher wages, lorry drivers who might have recently retired may be tempted back into the industry for a period of time, essentially to help out and to earn out.
Yeah, if you address those challenges that you rightly identified about the conditions, they don't want to do it because it's hard graft and it's not necessarily a pleasant environment for them. So they need to be addressed. That also takes time. It's a structural problem, one which has been coming for many years, and the industry hasn't addressed it. Totally agree with you. I think you're right to say that. But we are doing that, but it doesn't happen overnight. And in the meantime, we need help from government. We don't need them saying that we're crying wolf. We need them to acknowledge that there is a problem. People know there's a problem because they can't get the food that they want.
James,
and the restaurants they like to go to aren't open.
James, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Really appreciate that. The issue of lorry driver shortages, and maybe you're listening or watching and you're a lorry driver, either current or recently retired. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts, or maybe a family member or a friend of yours is a lorry driver, current or recently retired. It is a huge issue, but my view is that it's one that actually the business community, big businesses in particular, they've got to sort out. They've got to look at the working conditions. They've got to look at the pay levels. I really don't think that we should be using it as an excuse to reopen some form of temporary visa scheme. We all know if you had a temporary visa, it would become permanent. There would never be a good time to stop that. So we've been talking lorry driver shortages. The time is approaching 11:30. This is Tice Talk on Talk Radio. It's time for the news.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. Britain's military mission in Afghanistan has come to an end after the final troops arrive back at Bryce Norton. And thousands are evacuated from their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. The UK's 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan has come to an end after the last remaining troops arrived back from Kabul. The final RAF plane touched down at Bryce Norton this morning, carrying the British ambassador to Afghanistan and military personnel. The Prime Minister paid tribute to UK troops this morning.
UK troops and officials have worked round the clock to a remorseless deadline in harrowing conditions. They have expended all the patience and care and thought they possess to help people in fear for their lives.
Meanwhile, the US President has warned that another attack on Kabul airport is highly likely within the next 24 hours. The State Department has urged all American citizens to stay away from the area. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes in the United States as Hurricane Ida closes in. Long lines are forming at the airport in New Orleans as the Category 4 storm is expected to make landfall in Louisiana later this evening. Winds are expected to reach up to 140 miles an hour. It comes exactly 16 years since Hurricane Katrina hit the region. The drinks firm Heineken is to pour £38 million worth of funding into its UK pubs and generating 500 new jobs. The company says the investment will go towards 700 of its star pubs and bars by the end of the year. Sport now, and Hannah Cockcroft has taken gold in Tokyo and smashed her own world record in the women's 100 metres T34. She now has a total of 6 gold medals, and it's the 8th time she's broken a world record this year. That's your news on Talk Radio TV, more in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and we're into the last half hour of the show. And what better way to start it than to talk about the nemesis of us Brexiteers? Yes, the one and only, the suave, the sophisticated, the tall, the good-looking Michel Barnier, the man who completely out-negotiated us with Theresa May's negotiating team, the man who, frankly, we would have rather had on our side. Well, he's looking to his future as he completed the Brexit negotiations, and he's thinking, maybe I should stand for election, and you might as well head for the top job. So yes, he is standing to be Monsieur le Président de la France, and clearly he thinks that he needs to make sure he can hit the ground running with a policy that is going to grab people's attention. It doesn't seem as though he wants more rules and regulations. He wants to do the exact reverse of what any of us might have thought. It appears that he wants to have a 5-year ban on immigration. Incroyable! Totally extraordinary, you might exclaim. And I'm delighted to be joined by Rupert Lowe, a former MEP with me in Brussels, a man who got to know Michel Barnier. I think you actually stayed in the same hotel at various times, Rupert. So, you know Michel. What do you make of all of this? It's an extraordinary turnabout.
Well, Richard, good to see you, first of all. I haven't spoken to you for a while, but good to see each other
and
again.
You too.
No, Michel Barnier, I think, as I've always said, he's a decent man. I think he's a deep French nationalist. He's a sort of Savoyard Frenchman who, quite extraordinarily, as you say, built his career on the back of this post-war European experiment, which was an attempt really to destroy the nation state and create this European superstate, quite apart from creating the euro, which we all know is completely unsustainable and destined for complete chaos in the end. But look, I liked him. I met him not only at the hotel, but a few times in the Parliament. He was very approachable. I think he's fundamentally a decent man, but I think here the contradiction is now standing, as you say, on a ticket for the French presidency, i.e. becoming a nationalist. So having climbed up the greasy pole trying to destroy the nation state and open the borders to sort of limitless immigration, he beat us up on that. I think, actually, as you say, he is a man I would have preferred having negotiating on behalf of the British. But I think he did overplay his hand. I think if he hadn't pushed so hard, he might have ended up with the Theresa May deal, which would have been an absolute horror story for Britain. So indeed. I think although he's a decent guy, he overplayed his hand. And I think, like you, it's quite extraordinary that having given us all this flannel about, open borders and, he's part of this cabal that created this Northern Ireland Protocol, which, was just a stick with which to beat Britain in the negotiations. So,
I mean, do you think he's just being a huge hypocrite in his quest for power, or did he know this all along?
But I think all of them are hypocrites, Richard, and I think there's only one thing they're interested in, and that's power. So they've used the EU to climb up the greasy pole, and if they can now leap off that pole and onto the French presidential pole, then they don't have the principle to suggest that they can't completely change their mind. And a bit like a lot of people I know in business, you say to them, well, that's not what you thought last week. Well, they go, well, I changed my mind. And so, they're quite capable of twisting and turning very, very much. But one thing I would say is if you look, I think it's highly unlikely he will be selected. But I think if I was to say, would I rather have Michel Barnier, Le Pen or Macron? I mean, little but Napoleon, as we know, hates the British. I think Le Pen would very quickly become hung up on finding a public enemy number one, which would probably turn out to be us. I think Michel Barnier is, of the three of those, if I had to choose one of them, I'd rather do business with him.
Interesting. And so you say that it's unlikely. I mean, it's quite a complicated process to be elected French president. He has to go through what's called a primary. I mean, what are the chances that he might actually win the primary for his party?
I think pretty slim, Richard. He's got to win the backing of the Républicain party, and I think that's probably unlikely. But because he's from outside the mainstream. I think he's, as I say, he's a Savoyard. He built his reputation, as we probably know, on the 1992 Albertville Olympics.
That's right.
And I think he's fundamentally a decent man, but as you say, there's so much hypocrisy and contradiction here.
How well known, Rupert, is he in France? Do you think, as a public figure?
Richard, he's an outsider. I think he's an outsider for the nomination.
I mean, surely to us he feels like very much an insider. His name is sort of, we're so close to it. But that's interesting. You think that he's an outsider. And therefore he's got less chance. And ironic, isn't it, Rupert, that you think, and I think I actually tend to agree with you, that of that choice of three, Barnier, Macron or Le Pen, he would probably be, from a British perspective, the best person to deal with, to negotiate with. Rupert, thank you so much for those thoughts. We must get together. Fascinating. It's going to be really interesting to see how Michel Barnier progresses. Unbelievable to even think he wants to renegotiate the Schengen agreement. That was Rupert Lowe, former MEP, who knows Michel Barnier, got to know him quite well in Brussels, with his thoughts on that French presidential campaign. And we're just going to, we've got a caller from Anne in Burgess Hill on Brexit. Anne, a very good afternoon to you. What are your thoughts?
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Well, I think the reality is over the last few years, and it isn't only the Foreign Office, the Home Office, many of our important departments, local and national government, because we have to select people on quotas, sometimes we have not been employing the people with the right skills. And I think now that Brexit and all that's going on, we really do need, and your earlier speaker, who obviously should be in the front line, did touch on it, about the competence and expertise that we need to move forward in this ever-changing world that we live in. And it does worry me, because I've had lots of reports from people, whether it's in the medical profession or coming into this country, and I think I could call it the racism between the races. The man from Iran being told he will never operate as a neurosurgeon in the UK by a Chinese BMA member. I've had a lot of those incidents that have worried me that wouldn't have happened 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, I think it's an interesting point, Anne, in that, we do need more expertise. I think there has been in a sense, particularly in the Foreign Office, because we haven't had the independence to be able to do and think for ourselves. We've had to rely so much on being part of the EU that now actually we are independent. We've got to bring that expertise in. We've got to draw in experts. I mean, people like Ben Habib, he really knows his stuff on the specific region of Pakistan. We had a tweet in earlier complimenting Ben for his understanding, the way he could articulate what's going on in that region. And I think that in a sense, all government departments, they've got to welcome outside expertise to come in to help for 2 or 3 years in order to do the best for our country. Do you share that view?
Oh, I really do, and I think we need to look. It's a fault in our nation that's gone on for years that we keep changing and reorganising and restructuring, and we get rid of the people with the background, knowledge and expertise, so we lose their skills. So how about we look at the people that we have pensioned off, retired off, whatever, and bring them back to use their skills and knowledge? And I think he did mention people in the diplomatic service who've retired. My worry, can I quickly say, is that with COVID, every organisation, we are working from home, we're short-staffed, all of this, and it's like the country is never going to get back on its feet unless we get people back working effectively, as a nation, and we've got to educate people.
Well, without question, no question at all, Anne, we have got to get life back to normal, what I call the old normal. We've got to learn to live with COVID, and we do need people back at work, being productive again, very quickly ending the furlough scheme. There's an irony, isn't there? We've got lorry driver shortages and shortages of staff in other sectors, and yet we've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people still on furlough. Thanks for that, Anne. You're listening to Tice Talk. The time is 12:42. We're rapidly approaching the end of this show, but there's still time to take your tweets or calls. 0344 499 1000. This is Tice Talk, and of course, it is the home of Common Sense Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last 10 minutes or so of my show. It's 12:46 on Talk Radio. We've got some callers, lorry drivers, responding to our discussion with James Bilby about the lorry driver shortage. First of all, we've got Tom in Enfield. Good afternoon, Tom. How are you? What are your thoughts?
Hi, yeah, I'm well. There's lots of reasons for shortages of lorry drivers. It's not just Brexit. Brexit hasn't helped. My view, I voted for Brexit, but my view is that Brexit was badly done by Prime Minister Theresa May, who didn't believe in it.
I agree with that.
In my opinion, we've had a bodged Brexit, but which Boris inherited and called it an oven-ready deal. Although it was, in my opinion, it was just her deal rehashed and lipstick put on it. But other reasons for shortages. People went home during the pandemic because during the 3-month lockdown, if you were a self-employed agency lorry driver in a non-essential area, you didn't get any money for 3 months. You couldn't get furlough. What do? Well, you go home to mum and dad in Poland or wherever in Eastern Europe you're from. Then you don't come back because you've got a job back home. There's much more money to be earned. I talked to a truck driver the other day who's Polish. He's got friends in Sweden, Switzerland, and Germany, saying that you can earn £80,000 a year, equivalent in euros, Swedish krona, or Swiss francs, as a truck driver. Here now, you can earn about 50 grand a year. Money's going up.
And Tom, there's an issue about the this change in tax treatment, isn't there?
Yeah,
the IR35 is. How
Absolutely.
significant is that? I didn't talk about that with James Bilby.
No, that's significant. I have a limited company. Basically, for the last few years, if you're an agency driver, you worked self-employed. It was tax beneficial. You didn't pay any national insurance. You paid about 5% less tax. You could submit, expenses that were relevant to your industry, hard hat, boots, and protective clothing, and so on. Your mobile phone bill and so on, and that ended in April just gone, so a few months ago, and suddenly it wasn't worth the while of people who were truck driving to continue truck driving. The industry, truck driving, has been neglected. I've been doing it for 20 odd years, and it's been neglected all that time. For a long time, there's been an oversupply of eager and willing drivers from the expanded EU.
And that's led to downward pressure on the wages. That was one of my big things, and I knew that would change with Brexit. And in a sense, that's good news, because people who were essentially had zero real wage growth for a decade or more, then have got more sort of negotiating leverage on their side.
A lot of people retired last year as well. It's an ageing profession, as you've just said. Average age 55. You said, I thought it was a bit lower than that. Where I work, it's very typical. I'm 56. A lot of drivers are my age. It hasn't attracted the young blood coming in over the years. It is now. Now, my company, I work for a big dairy supplying milk to supermarkets.
So that's changing, you think, in terms of attracting?
They're offering apprenticeships to the early 20s, then they'll pay for them to get their licence.
Well, that's fantastic, Tom. I'm a great fan of apprenticeships as opposed to people wrongly being sort of coerced to go to university. Tom, thank you for those thoughts. I think we've got another ex-lorry driver, Ken in Hatfield, on the line to share his thoughts with us. Ken, a very good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Gov. No, I'm not an ex-driver. I'm still a driver.
Still a driver.
Still a driver, part-time. What I'm doing now is using up the end of my licences, my CPC, and I'm stopping. I can't afford to carry on paying £700 for training that is irrelevant to a lorry driver. You've got your medical expenses on top, your more training on top. The government don't want us. It's as simple as that. Everything is set against the lorry driver.
That's very interesting, because I haven't actually heard that before. And are those rules and regulations, Ken, that were set by the EU, or are these UK government rules that so often is just way too bureaucratic?
It's basically, I think it was a European rule, but the government just increased it and made it so complicated and unattractive to young drivers. Why should someone pass their test after spending £1,500, then spend another £700 on a CPC course that is irrelevant to the driver? my first CPC day was learning how to use a pump truck because they didn't know what to teach us because we're already professional drivers.
Yeah.
It's that type of setup. Everything's against you. All the congestion,
I mean, I hate
charges, everything.
Fascinating. Ken, thank you for those thoughts. I mean, I hate over-regulation, unnecessary regulation. Obviously, it's important to have, appropriate training and the right health and safety. But if you get way too much of it, then it bears down. It sounds like Ken there suffering from too much regulation and costs, which is making it less attractive from him. I think we've got another caller, Karen in Peterborough. Good afternoon. What are your thoughts on the lorry drivers?
Well, my husband works for Tesco's as a lorry driver. He's 52. They earn about £13 an hour working for the supermarket. They can earn £17, £18 an hour working for the Royal Mail or for DHL or for working for the container companies. So people are just leaving the food industry because it doesn't pay the same as the others. And also, it leaves the supermarkets are now paying contractors and they're paying them over £200 a load. So they're hemorrhaging money out in that way, but they haven't increased the prices for their own drivers. So their own drivers are leaving.
Well, in a sense, I guess, Karen, that's how free markets work. If if those particular firms are not paying their drivers or indeed any staff enough, then people will move to different industries. I mean, £13 an hour sounds really very low compared to rates I know from elsewhere. And it sounds like the supermarkets have had it too easy for too long, and that this is a bit of a shock to them. I mean, obviously, if your husband's been driving for Tesco's for a fair while, obviously, did an incredible job that we're all very grateful for during, lockdown and keeping us all fed and watered, so to speak. But they've got to respond. They've got to look to the future.
They paid 10% extra during the COVID thing. But what they also do, which they didn't tell anyone, was they actually offered to furlough my husband because he was over 50 and he refused. And all of their drivers over 60 that had any health complaints, they basically put them on furlough or they retired them off because they didn't want the risk involved.
Sure, which
and
you can sort of understand.
They're chronically short of drivers now. But, I mean, my husband's depot alone lost over 100 people going back to, Eastern Europe and places like that. So, they find themselves in the situation they're in, and some of it is of their own making.
But I mean, this, yes, obviously COVID was a huge shock, but in reality, I think much of this has been completely predictable for some time, and they haven't responded to it. They've sort of had, they've had the advantage, the negotiating leverage, the big supply of drivers in their favour for too long. And now they've got a few challenges. They've slightly misread the situation. They don't like it. Bluntly, I think they've got to cough up.
It's only the pension that keeps my husband there. I mean, because he's been working for them for over 14 years.
Right.
And I think that's the case with a lot of them. But, it's getting to the point now where the amount of money that he would earn in a pension, I mean, he's 52, elsewhere in the time before he retires, would be outdoing what he would earn for Tesco's because they don't actually pay anything like the other companies. So you get to a point where it would be worth almost moving his pension over. But I know that there are a lot of drivers that are in his situation where the reason they stay there is because they're tied in the pension.
Yeah, sure. Which and pension planning is important. Karen, thank you so much for that. Fascinating thoughts from the wife of a Tesco driver. I think we've got one more call before the top of the hour. Mike in Exeter. Hi, good afternoon, Mike. What have you got to let us know, to tell us about?
Good afternoon, Richard. Yeah, I drive trucks as well. But I just wanted to say about it links in, the driver shortage links in actually with your doctor shortage. It's all about this country since Tony Blair, where he went education, and opened the floodgates to immigration, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it led the companies and the organisations to think, well, we can just hire people from abroad.
Yes.
And therefore, over the last 20 years, the amount of training being done in the country for all different things has not been occurring. And now all of the combination of events of Brexit and the pandemic is coming home to roost.
Absolutely right, Mike. Absolutely right. I've been saying this for ages.
But every time I hear people from the transport industry on the radio, somebody talking to you again today, they don't mention this. They don't mention. They say, "Oh, we need short-term visas." No, you need to train people.
You need to train your own staff. Absolutely right, Mike. Thank you so much for that. Training staff is absolutely critical. Training British workers to do great British jobs, sensible levels of pay. That was one of the things that I was most keen on as to why Brexit was so important, so necessary, so vital. We've had a full-on, action-packed show. Unbelievably, the 3 hours is coming to an end. We've been talking, obviously, about Afghanistan. We talked about the Sunday Spotlight on Southern Water. Great debate online, Anonymity, whether we should ban it or not. And here is, of course, the one and only Bob Mills in the studio. Bob, how happy are you with social media?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love what I'm reading other people's. That's what I like doing, to see what the stick other people's get. Yeah, I have a very limited number of people. I've actually met some very nice people on it.
Right.
And the rest you just ignore.
You just ignore.
Let me give you Brexit in an absolute nutshell.
Go for it, Bob.
I live in a very nice part of London. I live in North London, Highgate Woods, like that. And I overheard a woman with no irony about 6 months ago saying, it's a disaster because the nanny has gone back to Spain and you've no idea what these English girls sort of money they want. And I think, and there, my dear, we have the whole of your problems sorted up.
Sorted out.
What they want, I think you'll find, is a living wage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely fantastic. I've heard that elsewhere, actually. And I think, we've known this was coming.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is these callers from, lorry drivers, their family members. This has been a problem that was there. And basically, big business has had it too good.
Yes.
They've had it too easy. There's been too big a supply of, essentially workers and drivers from the rest of the EU, which means they haven't had to train and they haven't had to pay the correct rates.
Right, so there you go.
Yeah, so what have you got on your show?
Ah, what a lovely show. Tom Allen's coming in.
Lucky you.
Lovely Tom Allen's coming in. And then I'm talking online to Shappy Korsandi, who's got a book out. She does everything. She's an actress now, a comedian, and now a writer. Are you a music fan?
Ish. I'm not a great
prog
music
rock.
fan.
You're prog rock
No,
fan?
that's
Steve
way
Hackett off of
I'm Genesis and Peter Collins.
Steve Hackett off of
Steve
Genesis.
Hackett's great. We're going to have to leave it there because we're late already for the news. Thank you to my production team. Thank you to you listeners, viewers, all you callers. It's been a great show. Same time, same place next week. This is Tice Talk, and you are listening to Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they